You probably clicked on this video because you felt it too. That tension in the news cycle, that sense that something major is shifting in Canada's economic story, and you don't want to be the one who misses it. Because while the world has spent the past 72 hours glued to the chaos in the United States, an entirely different reality has been unfolding up here, one that could define Canada's next decade. Think about what dominated the headlines this week. Trump threatening sweeping tariffs, the White House firing off economic decrees like warning shots, a bizarre incident with boats allegedly linked to trafficking, and yes, the former president reportedly falling asleep in a cabinet meeting. America's institutions are wobbling, markets are jittery, a superpower is visibly straining, and in that noise, Canada's own story almost disappeared. Into that vacuum stepped Pierre Poilievre, pushing a narrative of collapse, that Canada is going to hell in a handcart, that the Liberal budget will plunge the country into depression, that families will starve and businesses will shudder. It's fear politics, calibrated to sound like inevitability. But the numbers released this week tell a sharply different story. The International Monetary Fund just confirmed that Canada's economy has held up better than expected, despite the tariff shockwaves. And meanwhile, our own labor market delivered a trio of surprises. 3 straight months of job gains. Unemployment dropping from 6.9% to 6.5%. 181,000 new jobs between September and November. Youth employment surging by 50,000 positions in November alone. Quietly, Canada is stabilizing at a moment when the U.S. is sliding. And that's the part almost nobody is noticing. While Washington unravels on live television, Canada might be taking its first small, steady steps toward economic separation, toward a future not held hostage by American volatility. If that's true, then everything about where we're heading next is about to change. Are you ready to see what the data really reveals? As the spotlight keeps drifting toward Washington's implosion, the pressure surrounding Canada has become almost gravitational. Investors feel it. Policy analysts feel it. Anyone tracking North American indicators can see the pattern forming. The continent is under strain, and Canada is standing in the crosscurrent. The starting point is impossible to ignore. Trump's tariff campaign, now hitting allies at rates between 10 and 20%, depending on the sector, has injected volatility into every economy connected to the U.S. Within weeks, foreign direct investment across North America slowed, with some categories tracking declines of 8 to 12% year over year. In a region powered by predictability, instability became the new baseline. For Canada, this should have been devastating. And yet, something unexpected surfaced. In its latest assessment, the International Monetary Fund reported that Canada has outperformed its earlier 2024-2025 projections, citing resilience built into the Canada-U.S. Mexico trading framework. Even without a renegotiated deal, the existing structure kept key sectors insulated from tariff spikes that hit Europe and the UK far harder. Then came the labor market numbers that hit like a quiet counterargument. 3 consecutive months of job gains, unemployment falling from 6.9% to 6.5%, a net 181,000 jobs added from September through November, one of the strongest 3-month stretches since 1999's tech boom cycle. Youth employment, previously a red flag, jumping by 50,000 positions in a single month. Even participation shifts showed movement. 26,000 fewer people reporting job seeking without success, pushing the unemployment rate even lower. None of this looks like an economy spiraling. And that's the critical point. As the U.S. shows signs of contraction, factory closures, negative job growth, and consumer confidence hitting multi-month lows, Canada's indicators aren't mirroring the decline. They're bending in a different direction. A small divergence, yes, but in economics, small divergences are how long-term separations begin. What matters now is whether this unexpected momentum can survive the next wave of global instability. While analysts were busy dissecting labor charts and IMF projections, another story, quieter, sharper, and far more revealing, unfolded in the background. It began with a promise, a photo op, and a $500 million federal commitment meant to anchor Canada's position in the global EV race. And it ended with a multinational corporation walking straight out of the deal and into the Oval Office. Stellantis had pledged major production in Brampton and Windsor, a move projected to secure thousands of Canadian jobs and anchor a next-generation supply chain. The federal government committed just over $500 million to support the investment, standard practice in an industry where jurisdictions around the world compete with subsidies to attract long-term manufacturing. Then came the twist. Barely days after accepting the funding, Stellantis executives surfaced in Washington, shaking hands with Donald Trump and announcing fresh expansion plans on U.S. soil. No warning, no renegotiation, just a pivot so abrupt it stunned both Ottawa and Ontario's provincial team. And this time, Canada didn't swallow the loss. Instead, Ottawa issued a formal notice of default, a legal trigger that signals breach of contract and initiates proceedings to reclaim the entire $500 million, not through press conferences, not through public theatrics, but through the binding power of the agreement Stellantis had signed. A move quiet in tone but unmistakably firm in meaning. If you break the deal, Canada will collect. It's a strategic shift that many Canadians have been waiting for. An end to the era where foreign giants could pocket incentives and walk away without consequence. And it sends a message across the global corporate landscape. Partnering with Canada now comes with accountability, not just opportunity. In a moment when American instability is distorting investment patterns, this response marks something more than retaliation. It marks the beginning of a new economic posture. The question is whether other multinationals will see it as a warning or an invitation. As the Stellantis fallout ripples across boardrooms, a broader transformation is taking shape beneath the surface, slow, methodical, and structural. It's the kind of shift that rarely makes headline noise, but quietly rewires the direction of a nation's economy. And in Canada's case, the rewiring is already underway. The International Monetary Fund didn't just say Canada outperformed expectations, it highlighted why. Ottawa's decision to commit tens of billions to long-term infrastructure, public transit, ports, energy grids, clean tech corridors was not political ornamentation. It was a recalibration of the country's economic foundations. The latest federal budget earmarked nearly $30 billion for major infrastructure initiatives, with projections that these investments would generate sustained returns over a decade, not merely a fiscal year. And the effects are beginning to show. The job data that caught analysts off guard didn't come from a boom in retail or speculative growth. Much of the momentum came from sectors linked to construction, transportation, and emerging technologies. Industries that expand when governments build physical and digital capacity. Youth employment, climbing by 50,000 inches November, wasn't random either. Young workers tend to enter fields where new projects open doors. Even the pattern of part-time jobs, often framed as a weakness, aligns with an economy in transition, where companies ramp cautiously before committing to full-scale expansion. It reflects exactly what the IMF warned global markets about. Instability discourages major investment. Yet within that instability, Canada's internal spending is creating pockets of early activity. And then there's diversification. Ottawa has intensified outreach across Europe, East Asia, and the Indo-Pacific, pushing trade opportunities that reduce reliance on U.S. demand, an approach that once sounded aspirational but now feels essential as American instability deepens. Piece by piece, Canada is shifting from reacting to global shocks to engineering its own strategic posture, not loudly, not dramatically, but deliberately. The real test is whether these early structural moves can turn resilience into long-term independence. While Canada's structural recalibration unfolds, another shift has been happening, not in boardrooms or labor reports, but in the public mood itself. And in politics, perception can move markets as effectively as policy. Over the past 2 weeks, the data coming out of polling firms has carried a message as quietly disruptive as any economic indicator. A new Legger survey, commissioned by a traditionally conservative-leaning outlet, shows the federal Liberals holding 43% support among decided voters. The Conservatives, despite months of hard messaging and economic doomsaying, have slipped to 36%, a 2-point drop that breaks their upward trajectory. But the number that really stands out comes from the leadership comparison. Mark Carney registers as the preferred prime minister for 40% of respondents, while Pierre Poilievre trails at 28%. These aren't just political statistics. They're signals of a psychological turning point. For months, Canadians have been caught between global turmoil and domestic uncertainty, waiting for something, anything, that resembled steady ground. And now, with unemployment falling from 6.9% to 6.5%, with 181,000 jobs added within 3 months, with youth employment surging by 50,000, that steady ground finally feels tangible. It's not euphoria, it's not triumph. It's something more valuable. Confidence. Confidence that the direction, while imperfect, is forward. Confidence that the country isn't spiraling into the collapse narrative pushed by the loudest microphones. Confidence that Canada is doing what most nations can't right now, pulling away from a declining U.S. economy without triggering fractures at home. And political confidence has consequences. It emboldens investment. It calms consumer behavior. It strengthens the government's ability to pursue long-term strategy rather than short-term survival. For the first time in a long while, the national mood is no longer defined by fear alone. But momentum is fragile, and the next steps could determine whether Canada's advantage grows or evaporates. And now, as the numbers settle, the polls cool, and the political noise slowly fades into the background hum of a continent in flux, we arrive at the hardest truth in all of this. Canada's moment of opportunity is real, but it is also painfully fragile. The divergence from the United States, the drop in American employment, the factory closures, the negative industrial output, the declining consumer confidence, stands in stark contrast to Canada's unexpected momentum. But history has made one thing clear. Separation in economics is never a single event. It's a long corridor filled with unpredictable turns, each one shaped by global forces far beyond our borders. Because for all the optimism in the IMF's assessment, for all the strength shown in our labor numbers, the challenges ahead are substantial. Emerging instability in Europe, shifting production chains in Asia, tightening credit markets across the OECD. These pressures are colliding at the exact moment Canada attempts to redesign its economic architecture. And the question every strategist is asking right now is brutally simple. Can Canada stay the course? Private sector investment remains cautious. Companies are watching the United States closely, uncertain whether America's downturn is a temporary stumble or the start of a deeper structural unraveling. The tariff environment could escalate again. U.S. political volatility is reaching levels unprecedented in modern times, and any shockwave from Washington hits our economy faster than any other G7 nation. Even our own job growth, 181,000 positions added in 3 months, could slow if global demand softens or if businesses hesitate to convert part-time hiring into full-time roles. But here's the counterweight to all that risk. Canada is doing something it hasn't done in decades. It's positioning itself ahead of the storm instead of inside it. Infrastructure spending, nearly $30 billion in strategic projects, isn't just stimulus, it's insulation. Youth employment gains aren't just monthly noise, they're demographic renewal. The Stellantis pushback isn't just legal maneuvering, it's a statement of sovereignty. The polling surge isn't just political weather, it's a signal of social stability at a time when other democracies are fracturing. And perhaps the most crucial element is the psychological pivot underway. Canadians, long conditioned to tie their economic fate to the United States, are starting to see another path. One where Canada isn't dragged into every American crisis, one where our growth doesn't depend on Washington's coherence, one where we build resilience not by reacting, but by designing. Still, nothing about the road ahead is guaranteed. The next 6 to 12 months will test whether Canada can maintain its trajectory, whether job growth solidifies, whether diversification accelerates, whether global partners treat Canada as a rising stabilizer rather than a satellite orbiting a declining superpower. The opportunity is here. The question is whether we seize it. If Canada can turn this fragile divergence into a durable strategy, we may be witnessing the early chapters of an economic realignment that defines a generation. If we can't, the window may close as quickly as it opened. Thank you for watching, for thinking critically, and for caring about the direction this country is heading. If you want to stay ahead of the story, not behind it, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode. Your support helps keep these deep dive analyses alive. I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp, stay informed, and stay Canadian.